The Public Affairs Research Institute, or PARI, has released a report on its investigation of the provisions of basic municipal services to low-income households in South Africa. The report is titled Access to Basic Services, Enabling Progressive Transformation or Entrenching Poverty and Inequality. Now, the study was meant to answer a key question. Is the current model for the provision of basic services contributing to increased living of standards, reduced household poverty and greater equality? Senior researcher at the Public Affairs Research Institute, Dr. Tracy, who authored the report, joins us virtually. Dr. Ledger, great to have you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. Good morning.
Well, reading through the report, just getting an understanding of where we are as a country and looking at, the question that was asked, it certainly does seem that poverty, service delivery and everything is just being affected by unaffordable municipal rates. But let's hand it over to you. Let's talk about some of the results coming out of this report.
Yes, so the original intention behind the provision of services, basic services, electricity, water and sanitation, to particularly poorer households in South Africa was always intended to be a tool of socio-economic transformation. It was intended to improve household standards of living, but it was also intended to create the opportunity in which households could engage in multiple livelihood opportunities. Most small business opportunities require access to electricity. Many of them require access to water. So the original policy intention was that we would have affordable universal access, that households would be able to actually afford to buy these services. It doesn't help that you've got an electricity connection, for example, in your house if you can't afford to pay for it. And what we found is that overwhelmingly, the poorest 50% of households in South Africa are being required to pay up to 1/4 of their income on paying for basic services. And we need to remember that these households very often don't have enough money to spend on food. So really, this current model really is entrenching poverty. We're asking households to pay money that they desperately need for other things, for municipal services, because we've completely lost sight of the goal of having affordable municipal services. Instead, the main function of these services is to provide the bulk of income for local municipalities.
Let's define poverty. Let's start right at the beginning. What is poverty, and how was service delivery actually intended to be a tool to reduce poverty and inequality?
So I think in terms of poverty measures in South Africa, we have something called the food poverty line, which means that a household does not have enough money really to buy the absolute basics that it requires in terms of food. And that's a monthly household income for a family of four of about 2,500 Rand a month. 1/4 of South African households, so nearly 4.5 million households, live at that level. So clearly we can't expect these households to divert any money from their food expenditure in order to pay for services. We need to remember that some of the most serious socioeconomic outcomes that we have in this country, negative outcomes, are related to food insecurity. We've got 1 in 4 children is so malnourished that they're classified as stunted. That compromises their cognitive development. It means that they're much more likely to suffer diabetes and hypertension later in life, with a corresponding burden on the public healthcare sector. There's a well-documented linkage between childhood malnutrition and increased propensity for violence in adults. So there are many reasons why we should be prioritizing food expenditure. Then we've got another 1/4 of the population that are living on a monthly income of less than 5,000 Rand a month for a family of 4. And also these families need to allocate the bulk of their income towards food expenditure. And then it's not the only thing they have to spend. They've also got to pay for accommodation and transport. So we've got a situation where something like 55% of South African households can be classified as poor, and every cent that they have to spend on municipal services is money that they don't have to spend on food. So what happens is people spend less and less on municipal services. So they spend very small amounts on electricity, for example. That affects households' choices about what to cook. It affects the ability of children to learn and do schoolwork after dark, and all sorts of other negative implications. So essentially, by making basic services so unaffordable for poor households, we're basically keeping them trapped in poverty. And then there are all sorts of economic opportunities, small-scale economic opportunities that one can take advantage of if one has access to electricity, but not if you can't afford to pay for it.
So if my understanding is correct, and when we look at the model of municipal services and how local government works, the reality is that the funding model is in such that all of the rates and services that I pay for as a resident there in wherever I'm staying, that should cover the cost of the whole municipality. Funding from the fiscus is very little. So the funding is for me to cover that cost, which at this point is very unaffordable. So is that how it's currently working? I mean, post-1994, that was the model. Has anything changed?
Yes. So the 1998 White Paper on Local Government set out a fiscal framework where local government was going to be able to raise the vast majority, up to 90% of its own operating expenditure from property rates and taxes and the sale of services like electricity and water. And the assumption was that there was going to be a big enough tax base in local municipalities to be able to fundamentally pay for almost all of local government's expenses. But at the same time, tariffs would be affordable enough for households to be able to pay it. So there was this understanding that you could achieve both of these goals at the same time. You could have financially viable municipalities, and you could have tariffs that households can afford. And what we've seen is that, in fact, this point of convergence does not exist at all. And obviously that's got to do with the fact that in 1998, no one would have anticipated that we would have had the current levels of household poverty and unemployment that we've got at the moment. But the fact of the matter is that we're trying to balance two goals that cannot be achieved at the same time. It's absolutely impossible for us to have affordable tariffs, because genuinely affordable tariffs would mean that 50% of households don't pay anything for basic services, and that another percentage only pay a much smaller amount that they're paying at the moment. But if that happened, the entire local government fiscal framework would collapse, because local municipalities wouldn't have enough income. We already see municipalities under significant financial distress. And I know that there's a narrative that says the only problem is corruption, and certainly corruption and wasteful expenditure is an issue, but it's not the only problem. We also see very well-managed municipalities that get clean audits, that are really under significant financial pressure, and the people who live there cannot afford to pay their municipal accounts. So,
and that's the reality. This, what you're saying, is the reality, because I mean that's the lived experience for, we talk about poorer communities and poorer South Africans, but I mean if we focus on the middle class as well, I mean the middle class, the burden that is on the middle class to cover these fees. I mean I look at our monthly rates and taxes coming in every single month, and it is completely unaffordable. I mean, just having a look at the price increases, which I know you're fully aware of, but I mean just for viewers out there, between 2010 and 2020, the Reserve Bank put out, the following municipal services increases way above inflation. So rate and taxes have gone up 118%, electricity has gone up 177%, and water is up a whopping 213%. I mean, for a household to afford that it's becoming almost impossible, and this is the whole issue of service delivery is just, it's not happening.
Yes, you've described it perfectly. We've arrived in a situation where we are actually impoverishing households in order to try and prop up the local government fiscal framework, which in our opinion was fundamentally flawed from the beginning, because it never really took into account the issue of affordability. So even though the original policy said that we must have universal services charges, affordable services charges, and everything must be affordable for all households, they never stipulated what that means. What does it mean for services to be affordable? And what we've seen is that the poorest 50% of South African households are being expected to spend up to 1/4 of their monthly income on services charges. And this is taking money away from other things that households desperately need, and it's thus entrenching poverty. And the free basic services policies that we have only cover a very small portion of households' requirements, and only a small fraction of households that should be benefiting from it are actually benefiting from it. So we've got this very perverse situation where the government is on the one hand spending billions and billions of rands to try and reduce poverty, but at the same time most of that money is effectively going back into the state via local government to pay for services, which seems like a really pointless sort of zero-sum game. What is the point of giving people additional money? I mean, I personally am in favour of a basic income grant, but the reality of the matter is that when you give a household a basic income grant, it's essentially got to use it to pay for the bare minimum of electricity and water that it requires. So where exactly is the pro-poor impact
And that's the reality. So, I mean, we're running into time constraints, so I'm going to just fire this question at you. I mean, we spoke at the very beginning, this study was meant to answer a key question. Is the current model for providing basic services contributing to increased standards of living, reduced household poverty and greater equality? I think I know the answer from just chatting to you for a few minutes, but tell me, what is this answer?
No, absolutely not. And the longer we carry on and pretend that the two ends are going to meet, which they're never going to do, the worse the situation is going to get.
Yeah, and this is a great problem. I mean, because when we're looking now, we're going into these municipal elections, and parties can make you all these promises, but at the end of the day, the actual structure and makeup is not working. And I mean, do you think this needs to be completely rethought?
Yes. Our suggestion is that we say the priority of the system must be to deliver genuinely affordable services. And what does that mean for service delivery? What does it mean for service pricing? And then what does it mean for the income model for local government? And then on that basis, once we've prioritized pro-poor policies, then we need to say, what is the structure and form of local government that is going to deliver those cost-effective services? But we need to prioritize affordable service delivery, in addition to obviously quality and reliable services, but we need to prioritize affordable service delivery in the system and then work backwards from that into what kind of institutional structure is most likely to deliver those outcomes.
All right, Dr. Tracy Ledger, I'd love to carry on talking to you, but I'll have to leave it there. I think giving us a great understanding of this, and also other recommendations that have come through from PARI saying food first. It's an approach to basic services provision under which all households that do not have sufficient disposable income to purchase a basic basket of food should receive all services for free. So that's a big one. But in terms of reading the report, get online. PARI is where you can find a PARI. You'll see that report. Very, very interesting. Quickly, we need to take a break. We'll see you after this to say goodbye to SABC 2.
The situation in Afghanistan, where, of course,